Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our session here today in the morning on the Kommunismus Kongress. We will have a talk from Politsturm, the Russian Communist group. Alexander on my side here is our speaker for today. And we have Vasily on the Zoom call, and he will later be able to answer questions as well. Yeah, nice that you're here. The conversation will be made by Alexander and me, so we are the moderators somehow, and we will then quickly after the speech we will go into discussion with you, so you can ask your questions. Some of you had the time now to prepare your questions or your remarks based on the articles that we showed you here. And if anybody later will have problems to put his question in English, then it will be no problem to translate it. But if you are able to, it's faster and easier for us if we do everything in English in this room here. Okay, so we will start with Alexander, and yeah, a nice welcome.
Thank you.
Let's see the presentation here.
All right, so good day to the participants of the Congress. I represent Politsturm, the Russian Communist Organization. During my speech, I will highlight the current situation in the Russian Federation, in the Russian Communist and Workers' Movement, and talk about our organization, a number of issues related to our work and the international communist movement. Russia is one of the major imperialist states. Foreign communists and ourselves have described the Russian imperialism in a number of publications. These analyze the structure of the Russian economy, the expansion of Russian monopolies, and the essence of the Russian state in detail. These materials clearly show the Russian Federation as one of the major imperialist powers. You can find them on our website. They were handed out to you before my speech, so I will not repeat their contents here. The current situation in Russia, Part 1. I want to pay attention to the current processes in the Russian economy. According to the Stat Bureau, inflation in Russia on an annualized basis is 15.9%. Russia ranks first in the world in terms of inflation. In 2022, Russia will lose from 8 to 13% of its GDP. The decline will continue until at least 2024. Since many Western companies left the Russian market, many people lost their jobs and kept losing them now. The credit burden increased by 1.5 trillion rubles, and at the beginning of the summer, the total debt of Russians to banks amounted to 25.5 trillion rubles. Prices in stores increased by an average of 30 to 60%. The petty and middle bourgeoisie did not have time to recover from the pandemic, suffered greatly. For example, the Russian government banned most Western films and animation from being shown. By mid-April, more than 36% of cinema halls were closed in the country. By the end of 2022, cinemas are expected to have a cumulative loss of at least 11 billion rubles. However, big capital is reaping the benefits of the escalation. On 22nd of February, 2 days before the start of the conflict, Medvedev wrote on his Twitter, "Welcome to the new world, in which Europeans will soon pay 2,000 euros for 100 cubic meters of gas." At the end of August, the price exceeded 3,000 euros. Now, Russian oil and gas companies receive 3,700 euros per second, which is 40% more than the beginning of the year. Oil and gas revenues in the budget, according to the Ministry of Finance, increased by 28% and reached 11.2 trillion rubles. The military corporations are the winners. According to the head of Rostech, Chemezov, by mid-August 2022, Rosoboron export portfolios of orders is more than $50 billion. For comparison, for the whole of 2020, this amount was $53.8 billion. Part of the big bourgeoisie, dissatisfied with the direction of the government, fled the country. Assassination attempts were made on some top managers of large companies under the guise of suicide. In addition, huge profits were made due to the withdrawal of Western companies. Many assets were bought up at a price of several times cheaper than the market value. As you can see, for the bourgeoisie, the current conflict has already paid off. while the broad masses of the population are facing rising costs, unemployment, and general deterioration of the quality of life. The political sphere is characterized by the domination of reactionaries. With the beginning of the conflict, censorship was sharply tightened. The penal code now threatens citizens with statements and publications critical to the current events. It is forbidden to call current events a war. There were a lot of cases when people were arrested for such inscriptions. The liberal opposition is almost completely suppressed. Liberal media were closed, such as Rain TV channel and the Echo of Moscow radio station. Some major figures of the liberal movement escaped abroad, the rest ceased their active work. To distract people from the current problems, the government launched a large-scale propaganda campaign supporting the armed forces, in which all major media and political parties, including the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, took part. Right-wing media groups and channels and social networks are actively gaining popularity. Nationalist, chauvinistic, anti-communist rhetoric is growing, including at the level of state media. All right, and just to give it a little context, the first video we'll be showing is the Russian State Duma deputies saying that communists are going to be a danger to the regime.
Which party he is? Do you know?
If I remember correctly, he is the representative of the so-called Rodina Party, which was aligned with LDPR, Liberal Democratic Party of Russia.
Continue.
Sorry, turned out I made a mistake. This guy on the video is a member of the Russian parliament from the ruling party, from the United Russia, or Единая Россия. And the one that I named as Rodina Party, he was actually openly claiming in his Twitter that there should be a decommunization of Russia after denazification of Ukraine.
Okay, so but we won't. What is his name? His name, Vasily, once more.
The name of the guy on the video is Oleg Matveychev.
Okay.
All right, then next video.
Next video?
Yeah.
Ah, you will show. Okay.
Yeah, and the second video is by Russia Today filming a racist volunteer.
Okay.
And so to say, the next images are basically a depiction of, so to say, further issues that Russia is ill with.
Maybe you can.
Yep. Yeah, so to say, in the first image is depicted, what do you call it, a neo-Nazi symbol of the arm upwards, and then how would I phrase it? So to say, them saying, yeah, okay, and with them raising their hand and saying, like, how would I phrase it? Yeah, so the image upwards saying 88, it represents the arm upwards, and then it's saying Heil Hitler, and then with the other individuals being shown, them having, so to say, images and the representation of neo-Nazi battalions, and with them actually being themselves as well. But obviously we cannot cover every single moment, but these photos and videos can give you a rough idea of the growing wave of reaction on the onset of capital of Russia. In Russia, pardon me. Next slide. The mobilization announced by Putin in Russia sharply aggravated the situation, causing fear, panic, and a sharp politicization of the masses. As tens of thousands of Russians try to flee the country, spontaneous anti-war rallies organized by the remnants of the liberal opposition have been brutally suppressed by the police forces. Despite the name partial, Putin's decree describes the essentially complete mobilization of the population liable for military service. That is millions and millions of people. At the current moment, according to our data, the priority for mobilization is placed on A, enterprises, factory workers, large retail chains, and commercial structures, i.e. places of high concentration of employees. B, small towns, villages, and other small settlements through the heads of the administration who have information about residents. Mobilization accelerates the aggravation of internal contradictions in Russia. Part 2, Russian communists. Okay.
Yeah, we have time. We have time.
Right. How did the communists react to the current events? All right, so how did the communists react to the current events? In Russia, the vast majority of the so-called official communist organizations came out in support of the government's actions. In fact, stood up to the interest of capital. The Communist Party of the Russian Federation, CPRF, the RCWP, and the Communists of Russia. Even before the events of February 24th, the social chauvinists tried to adjust the theoretical base for their views, distorting or hushing up the real facts, as well as taking random quotes from Marxist-Leninist classics out of context. Various figures of opportunism at different times expressed ideas about the absence of financial capital in Russia, and even about the absolute absence of banks, about progressiveness of the Russian Federation compared to the United States, and pushed the concept of so-called fascism for export. The groundlessness of these arguments was proved in a number of materials by Politsturm and foreign communists researching the topic of Russian imperialism. Both the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, formerly the largest communist organization, which has long become an element of the bourgeois political system, with capitalists and the FSB agents in its ranks, and the Communists of Russia, created by the government as a spoiler party of the CPRF, as a spoiler party of the CPRF, came out with chauvinist positions and supported Russian imperialism. In the summer, we published an analysis of the positions of these and a number of other Russian organizations on our website. I would like to focus on the RCWP, whose representatives participate in this Congress. For more than a decade, this party had been considered by international communists as a worthy alternative to the CPRF. We assume that the statements of this organization in support of the imperialist policy of the Russian Federation were a surprise for the international, we assume that the statements of this organization in support of the imperialist policy of the Russian Federation were a surprise for the international communist movement, but for us, it was a natural result of all their activities. Long before February 24th, 2022, the RCWP had a chauvinistic bias. Back in the mid-2010s, various people, including ordinary members of the RCWP and part of its leadership, pointed to the presence of a serious nationalist bias in the organization. The position of RCWP on the events of 2014 and the phenomenon of so-called People's Republics in Donbass confirmed the correctness of these accusations. The party acted as a promoter of social chauvinism and supported Russian imperialism by organizing numerous trips and assistance to puppet governments. We already have shown you the neo-Nazis in the ranks of the militia. In our opinion, one cannot advocate anti-fascism while actually supporting the fascists. This is a false anti-fascism carried out by the RCWP. They supported those regimes even when the communists were actually repressed there in 2016. They were excluded from participating in the elections. One of the leaders of this organization, Stulkin, made trips to the Donbass together with other leaders, distributing meaningless medals to soldiers of puppet states. The fact that RCWP ended up in the camp of supporters of the Russian imperialism 2022 is a natural result of policy. However, this is not the only problem of this organization. For a decade, we have seen the profanity of all real communist work. The RCWP did not work to expose Trotskyism and opportunist tendencies, which manifested themselves in the monstrous growth of broad-based media movements and organizations, especially in the second half of the 2010s. Moreover, such people as Alexander Batov, who was one of the members of the Central Committee and a member of the Rot Front, their front organization, Oleg Komolov, who openly advocates the replacement of Marxism with Wallerstein's theories, contributed to these trends. The RCWP's website has materials criticizing world systems theory, but at the same time, the same world system analysis was promoted by Komolov on his YouTube channel of 300,000 people. This practice of laxity lasted for years. All of them have worked and are working with broad left Trotskyist organizations, people, and bloggers. After February 24th, these cadres disintegrated from the RCWP and went further towards building a broad left organization that is along the path of opportunism. The fact that played into the hands of the RCWP was that up to the present time, criticism by foreign communists of the existing situation in the party was not carried out or was carried out mediocrely. This supported the false image of the RCWP as a real communist party in Russia. At this time, the RCWP continued to contact such organizations as the Communist Party of Greece and took part in the events of Solidnet. The KKE received congratulations from this party and published its materials. The RCWP organized a conference dedicated to the 100th anniversary of October Revolution in St. Petersburg. For more than a decade, this organization took part in many incomprehensible meetings in various countries, where formally important work was presented, but in fact had no use to the communist movement. Given the lack of practical outcomes and decisions of these congresses, it is possible that the activists of the RCWP and other organizations simply used these trips for tourism. There were representatives of this party at this Congress. We recommend our comrades to take a closer look at this organization. The RCWP is another example that if the international communists do not look closer into the situation, do not take it seriously without formalities, they will end up in the situation when they support an organization that harmed the communist movement in the country. Summing up, we can say that neither the size of the organization, nor the scale of its work, nor the quality of this work allows us to call the RCWP a communist party. The policies of the RCWP led to the separation and splitting off of its frontal organization, Rotfront, to the transformation of the RCWP into a social chauvinist organization, no different from the CPRF. Spinelessness, opportunism, lack of a simple organizational line, weakness, and the ongoing crisis of the Russian communist movement, these are the results of the activities of RCWP. Part 3, what is Politsturm? We hope that this review gives you a rough idea of why we did not become members of existing organizations, but created a new one. Our German comrades presented us in the program as an information source. This is not entirely true. Having emerged as an informational resource in 2014, 3 years later, Politsturm became a Marxist-Leninist movement. Since 2017, we have begun to work on the organization of Marxist clubs throughout the country to train the communists, the core of the future Communist Party. The entire organization is united by a single constitution and organizational principles, has centralized management and strict discipline. We are firmly committed to the creation of a communist party on Bolshevik principles. During our work, we have established certain contacts with workers in a number of cities in Russia. We firmly oppose the broad left organization. We oppose opportunism under the guise of pluralism of opinions, distortions and inaccuracies in theory, tolerance for opportunism and revision. Our work was originally staged and is staged now in an international format. Despite the fact that the Russian part of the organization is the main one, we have strong structures in Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and especially organized branch for the English-speaking audience with its own editorial staff and clubs. We have a clear membership systems with candidate experience and adoption of the constitution of the organization by its members. Within Politsturm, a single organizational and ideological line of Marxism-Leninism is maintained. Any factions, left or right deviations, autonomous tendencies, and general theoretical confusions are ruthlessly cleared out as befits the communists. Our clubs are not abstract hobby groups. The Marxist clubs of Politsturm have a clear study program and have been proven over the years. We maintain strict internal discipline and structure and prepare our staff for future party work. The vast majority of club members are currently involved in practical work in the organization in the field of trade union activities, agitation, and propaganda, or as lecturers for clubs. We collect and analyze the experience of working among employees, the experience and criticism of trade union organizing, and also identify modern methods of agitation and propaganda among the proletariat, taking into account specific conditions, the weakness of the Russian working class, its automation, a high level of danger from state bodies, the degree of bourgeois consciousness in the ranks of the workers, which was aggravated with the outbreak of the war. In the agitational sphere, Politsturm relies on the use of modern methods of visual representation of Marxist-Leninist propaganda. We focus on a wide range of propaganda materials, modern videos, theoretical and agitational articles, analysis of the experience of the USSR, criticism of modern opportunism and revisionism. We took a firm position on the current conflict right on February 24th. We support the joint statement of the Communist parties of Turkey and Greece about the imperialist war. We published our statement too, characterizing this thing as an imperialist war and calling not to fall in adventurism or social chauvinism, but to intensify our work. Part 4, Problems of the International Communist Movement. It is worth saying that throughout our existence, we have been forced and are now forced in Russia to work from scratch, focusing on the classics, taking into account modern experience and taking the initiative ourselves. We do not receive any help, no instructions, no support, not even basic interaction by foreign communists. And this cannot be but depressing, because one of the qualities of the communists has always been work on an international scale. The problems that confront us as international communists can be divided into two related parts: problems of theoretical unity and problems of practical nature. There is the International Meeting of Communists and Workers' Parties, also known as Solidnet. It contains an incredibly colorful list of organizations. More than 20 congresses and countless meetings and conferences have been held. They uttered pompous words about the struggle for socialism, about strengthening anti-imperialism, and so on. Take the last offline meeting in 2019 in Izmir. It resulted in extremely general, vague resolutions on solidarity with one or another nation on the struggle against imperialism. Such gatherings smack of formalism, absolute detachment from the struggle of our cause, and arouse in us, communists from former USSR and other countries, the strongest suspicions about the organizers of such congresses and the members of the parties of these organizers. We do not understand the meaning of these many empty meetings. We do not see the results of these meetings. We see that for decades, the communist parties have not hesitated to work with social chauvinists, with opportunists and other people who harm our common cause. In fact, the status quo remains in the communist movement in most countries. Such an arrangement of work does not help unite and strengthen the communist movement at the national level, but directly interferes with this work. A striking example is the situation with the RCWP, which I have already mentioned. A chauvinist bias dominated this party for decades, but the international communists either did not see this or turned a blind eye in the name of working with at least someone, allegedly for the sake of forming a Marxist-Leninist pole. We have talked and are talking a lot about RCWP, but there are others. The Communist Party of Ukraine, so-called the New Communist Party of Yugoslavia, the Party of Communists USA, etc. There are many of them all over the world. We do not understand the purpose for which assistance is provided to the social chauvinists and opportunists. Such assistance helps them to deceive the workers in these countries. Workers, especially the unconscious ones, will go to a large website such as Solidnet. They will see there a link to such a party or another party greeting from such a party. What will they think? Since the communists are cooperating with them all over the world, it is a good organization. They will join there and fall into the hands of social chauvinists. How many congresses and decisions have already been made? But what are they worth if the situation is not changed in a decade? The same Russian RCWP and the CPRF are sitting in Solidnet, and no Marxist-Leninist pole has been formed. They support the bourgeoisie, wars, and come up with a solidarist agenda. There are such parties in almost every country. What else is needed to understand that is necessary to break with such organizations? Tell me who your friend is, and I will tell you who you are. This principle is of utmost importance today. It is also known that in 2020, the next meeting was to be held in Pyongyang, in the DPRK. We do not understand the PT work, the PT before the DPRK, a state dependent on China, as well as before the PRC itself, before Vietnam, where there's also been a meeting, and before Cuba, where it will be this year. We do not understand this, but we see that such an attitude undermines the interest and trust in the communists. After all, China has long been an imperialist state. The state ideology of DPRK is a nationalist revision of Marxism, and private property is enshrined in the Cuban constitution. One can say the Communist Party is in power in Cuba, but are the comrades ready to guarantee that this same Communist Party will not hand them over to the government of the bourgeois state? There was a precedent in Russia when a person who had fled Cuba was handed over to the special services of the Russian Federation by the same Cuba. This is a small dependent country, and there is no guarantee that if we or you go there, this will not be done to you. For 2 decades of the 21st century, most organizations have not developed a unified position on China. There are no normal materials that would give a unified point of view for the communists. Such materials are possible and vital because the question of the attitude towards the PRC today on the eve of a big war is one of the main points of the communist movement. It is important to have unified assessment of this country, the main competitor of Western imperialism led by the United States. The issue of the PRC is tightly connected to the topic of false anti-imperialism, when any country that opposes the US is considered to be progressive. This question is important for the communists of Russia, Sweden, Germany, Spain, Latin America, wherever the Chinese capital is active. And it is especially important for China itself because our comrades are also there, probably deep underground. The absence of a single solution to one such issue leads to a lack of understanding of current processes, to obscuring problems and blind anti-Americanism. And this in turn leads to new splits in organizations, to statements, there is a progressive imperialism. This is a clear example of what throwing and inaction leads to. We are in favor of the practical orientation of such meetings, and we hope that the Congress at which we are speaking will give practical results. Let some kind of international dialogue be organized at the international level between activists and of organizations. Let there be less officialdom. Let there be an online format, but let the meetings on let it be meetings on specific topics with the adoption of key decisions that affect practical work. Why meet and waste resources on pompous meetings that lead to no practical results? Let there be online meetings, be such meetings that would form organizations, help to make adjustments to programs, condemn revisionism, opportunism, social chauvinism, work through current problems, and develop a unified tactics of action, a unified theory. Such a theory would be easier for all communists to defend. The problems of communists are connected not only with theory. The communists do not even have a basic alliance of practical work, the exchange of agitation materials, videos, direct information to expose the lies of the bourgeois media, the exchange of experience and tactics and actions, technical specialists, assistance in organizing secure communications. Finally, there is no organization to help in case of repressions. There are no backup contacts, no funds. This work is not staged absolutely. There is nothing. There is only SolidNet with social chauvinists such as RCWP and the CPRF and individual contacts. It is quite likely that in Russia, repressions against the communists will begin. And what are we doing to do then? Pardon me, what are we going to do then? If we want to work seriously, we must use all available means. Imperialism is set in motion before our very eyes. The contradictions are sharpening. Fascist sentiment is on the rise around the world. The right is on the rise, and the communists are on the verge of being banned. It's heading for a world war, but the crisis in the communist movement is only deepening. We in Russia are actually fighting the local opportunist and revisionist forces one-on-one in unequal conditions. We do not find any help from the international movement. On the contrary, we ourselves are ready to help in the course of establishing contacts. It turns out that only if, on the contrary, we ourselves are ready to help. But in the course of establishing contacts, it turns out that only a few of the foreign communists are ready for international work. Representatives of the Communist Party of Sweden are present at the Congress. When we wrote to them with a proposal to work together, they agreed, and for several months now, we have been sharing materials and translating them. This is the very minimum of interaction, but even this facilitates our common work. This is a positive example. And there is the example of neighboring Norway, where an organization that calls itself the Communist Party, in response to our proposal for cooperation, gave bureaucratic answer. We only cooperate with parties. The RCWP and the CPRF are the parties that are not our parties. You are not a party. Goodbye. And what should we think after this? About such communists? It is absurd and ridiculous when a group of 50 or 100 people call themselves a party, and there are many such parties in every country. It is necessary to abandon formalism. The organization that brought together this Congress did not call itself a party. It called itself the Kommunistische Organisation. And it's right, the party is a mass organization with discipline, with sufficient numbers, with context, with the working class movements, which can lead the class. A small organization with small numbers and no links to the labor movement cannot be called a party. At best, it's a movement. Anyone who looks only at the form and at the word party in the title, at the formal side before working, makes a mistake. It is necessary to speak directly. What are the numbers? What is it doing? What is the theoretical and practical basis? And only on the basis should we talk about cooperation or refusal. And such an approach, like that of the Norwegian organization, is the opportunism of a bureaucrat. You are a party, I will work with you. You are not a party, I will not work. Lenin would have been shocked by the situation. He found time and means to work with groups even before the October Revolution. Why can't modern communists do this? Even our small organization from the very beginning allocated funds and people for this work, let alone larger organizations. When we built our work, we did not have and do not have any examples, since no one published banal explanations, what a party is, how to create it, what agitation is, what experience to apply. These are the basic points that all communists need, but there are no manuals for them. Each organization needs to approach everything on its own, from scratch, relying on the experience of the ML classics. But the classics lived 100 years ago, and how to work now in Europe, in the conditions of deindustrialized cities with the development of trade networks and small businesses. How to work with office workers and employees, how to organize trade unions in countries without a culture of struggle, how to carry out this work. There is no single center and no one raises these problems. The International Communist Review, which is so much talked about, is in fact a very mediocre performance of this work. It is necessary that all organizations do this work, single out people, share experience. Only in this way is real interaction and not a formality possible. Many modern features are not actually used. Why? Because everybody is boiling in their own pot, busy with current affairs. But the local front of struggle does not imply separation from the main one. If the Marxist-Leninists had set up truly international work, then we should have obtained results 1,000 times better than the current state. Take, for example, the issue of agitation. Each organization is looking for personnel separately. In fact, everyone is working in parallel. The graphics are often outdated, ugly, following bourgeois stereotypes about communist agitation, and do not attract the eye. As a result, at most 20% of what could be done is done. Why is this happening? No money, no staff. No, this is done out of arrogance. Is it really so difficult to put a few smart communists who understand design into one team from several organizations in order to create high-quality graphics, work out design for specific needs? This would greatly facilitate our work and make it better. We in Politsturm have set up such work. We are doing such a high-quality design that even our opponents recognize it. We are ready to share the source files of our graphics or adapt them to your needs. Why does no one care about the organizational education system? We are fighting for the quality of personnel, organizations. so that our people know the theory perfectly, understand everything, and can apply it. We know that many organizations do not do this, but this is the most important work. It can and should be done in a systematic way, with a single training program, with a single list of references, if possible. There is no Marxist literature in many languages, and no one is doing this work. Trotskyists and Maoists translate their work. And what about the communists? The works of Lenin and Stalin are available in 2 or 3 languages, but they still need to be dug for on the internet. Is it difficult to create a single database of literature? This would greatly facilitate the work of all communists in general. And here we can organize help and make an internet library. Why are the Maoists from ICOR, who represent the strongest bias, organizing the work more carefully and efficiently? Why do their congresses have real achievements, whether it be the exchange of agitprop or helping those who are lagging behind, while Marxist-Leninists do not? Even among the Trotskyites, this work has been said. Russian Trotskyists from the Russian socialist movement or from the Marxist tendency receive funding and assistance from Trotskyists abroad, while the Marxist-Leninists offered the Russian communists to work in the RCWP with trips to the Donbass, discrediting the communists and a split. From the information available to us, the conclusion suggests itself. Few communists speak directly about the problems. They like to talk pompously about solidarity, about struggle, about anti-imperialism, but not about problems. Our organization believes that it is necessary to stop this practice and soberly address the problems. Not solving these issues, neglecting them, posing endless questions over problems, all of this is shooting yourself in the foot. By our inaction, we are ensuring the victory of the bourgeoisie for a long, long time until the best communists appear who understand and solve them. The local movement of each country are clear, but the problems we have shown are important for everyone. If they are not resolved, then the communists can blame only themselves and their inability and unwillingness to combat future failures. Conclusion. Politsturm is working to organize such international efforts. As communists, we are interested in the maximum integration of the now disparate forces of the international communist movement. We are ready to assist in organizing agitation and propaganda, share information on the situation in Russia and other countries, and strengthen international contacts to their fullest extent, exposing and removing from our ranks both individual representatives of this or that bias or opportunist organization. A condescending attitude towards problems and errors discredits our work and theory. In the current situation, it is quite possible and necessary to take a clear division according to, firstly, the attitude towards the Russian-Ukraine conflict, secondly, in relation to China, but above all, practical cooperation is vital. Not empty chatter, but vigorous interaction, the establishment of common work. There are means for this. I want to conclude with the declaration that our organization is prepared to work together with all communists of principle. I hope that the report of our Russian organization gave you an idea about the situation in Russia, in the Russian Communist movement, about Politsturm, and the problems of international communists. Contact us, write by mail or through online social networks. I'll put out business cards after this. We are always ready to provide all possible assistance to comrades from everywhere in the world to define tasks and applications of ideas, and are open to establishing cooperation everywhere. Thank you for your attention. This is all.
So thank you, Alexander, for your input here. I think there is a lot of discussion material now on the table. Pretty good. We would start to go directly into discussion. I think I won't start with the question from my side. I think it's better to directly go into the discussion with the audience. All right. So, and Vasily, so that you, so that you know, I'm not sure if you answer or Alexander answers. Maybe you then can decide by looking, and you raise your hand or somehow. I don't know how we do it exactly. But I think we will do it like in the other meetings. So we will take a few speeches, and then you can answer maybe if there were questions. Sometimes there are also commentaries, discussion commentaries. So yeah. But okay, Alex will want to say something.
First of all, I want to say something from the moderation, because actually this Congress is filmed online, right? I think we have a YouTube live show. No?
No.
But it's a recording, right?
Record.
Yeah. So the comrades from the RCWP and the CPRF, organizations in which we are in contact, they will listen to the things that you have said now. And for me, it's very important also for these organizations to know that, in my opinion, this kind of defaming other communist parties and groups is not acceptable. I think it's not our way to discuss with comrades, although we don't have their positions. You have said that RCWP is taking part in nationalist meetings and they support Trotskyist tendencies. And you say that CPRF and RCWP are socialist chauvinist parties without saying anything about their positions. This is not the aim of our Congress. The aim of our Congress is to discuss the argumentation and position of other parties. So I'm really shocked about the way you have defamed our comrades in Russia. This has nothing to do with international solidarity. And we should have checked this presentation before, because this kind of defamation we should actually not give place on our Congress. In my head was now, during your presentation, the thought to leave this room now, because for me, actually, there is no base of discussion with this kind of argumentation. But now I've decided to stay here and to hear the arguments of our comrades. But this was important for me to say, because our comrades from Russia, they will listen to this.
Okay, so obviously we have a different opinion here in the moderation. It's okay. I think we should. It's okay that we stated this, but we shouldn't go into this discussion. Let's stick to the contents. I'm pretty sure that Alex, you concord with this, that we should stick to the contents now. And so the first speaker from the audience, or anything from your side.
So we had an agreement with Alexander. He messaged me that he wants me to answer the questions. I think it's no problem, and actually I can answer those things. So should I start?
Yeah, if you make a short statement on this, and then we will go into the discussion with the audience. Okay?
Yeah, of course. So firstly, we had a limited amount of time, so we decided not to repeat those arguments from numerous our materials. They were handed to the audience before the meeting. There are materials about the positions of the Russian communist organizations. You can read them offline. They're on our site. So we decided not to simply read those materials, but to present maybe shorter outlook on those things. But if you want to have a deeper look, you can open our materials. You can open our articles. Finally, we have videos on our YouTube channel researching the problem as well. Secondly, yes, RCWP works with Trotskyists, at least worked through their frontal organization, Rotfront, or Russian Unified Labor Front. Or it's Rotfront in Russian, and it's Labor Front is how it's translated in English. This organization was their frontal organization, and their leaders, including Batov's wife, they confirmed they work with Trotskyists. They see no problem in that. And thirdly, well, what international solidarity can we talk about if those organizations, they're actually betraying this international solidarity? And those people who say Russian imperialism is progressive, they're betraying the Russian workers. They tell them, look, you suffer under capitalism, but it's no problem. Your country is actually more progressive. So you better to cooperate with your capitalists and agree to go into the bloody war. That's how they do it right now. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
Okay, so then we continue now with the audience, and I will stick to this video here. Okay.
Yeah, I have two questions for the comrade. Could you please say something about the connection between Alexander Dugin and Zyuganov? I know that in the 90s they were working together, but I mean, he was also counseling some of the deputies of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation in the State Duma. And I don't know what's the relationship now. Maybe you could say something about it. And I would also be interested in your opinion about the cooperation between the Communist Party of the Russian Federation with the state, because I know that they work together in some topics, like they were, for example, in favor of the so-called anti-gay law, or for the military actions in Syria and now in Ukraine. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, firstly about Zyuganov and Dugin. In my opinion, the position of Dugin is considered to be a little bigger than it actually is in the West. Dugin is a well-known reactionary Russian philosopher with even fascist sentiments, but in my opinion, he doesn't really influence the Russian politics. Like, he is well-known in the media sphere, but in the government has its own figures. They're very contrast, who lead the political sphere. And Dugin is more about being a talking head rather than doing something practical. If we speak about its connections to Zyuganov, Zyuganov actually doesn't require connections with Dugin to promote Russian nationalism, to support imperialism. He and the party he's a leader of has been doing it for literally decades, starting with late 1990s, through all millennium period, through 2010s, and even now. If we speak about the connections of the CPRF to the government, well, actually it's tightly connected. There are several region leaders, governors that are members of the Communist Party of Russian Federation. Actually, the region I live in has one of those governors. It's a real region. We have Andrei Klitschkov. Klitschkov is a member of the CPRF. They have deputies in the Russian State Duma, which work in several deputy committees. They have capitalists in their ranks. They have people working in the state apparatus. And from what we know, they have federal agents in the ranks of the party. You know, it's a part of the current Russian political system, and it's no wonder the state, the government wants to infiltrate the party, to control. And yep, all those things lead to this party not being a real communist party, to this party being filled with people who actually make all the things possible to show that CPRF is bad. They're actually they're doing it really good. And this party, well, as you can see in the international sphere, they align with social chauvinists. They say that this conflict is progressive, that everyone should support the Russian Federation against the American hegemony.
Okay,
thank you.
So Vasily, let's do it like this, that we take at least 2 speakers now, and you maybe write down the points you want to answer then, or you want to comment, yeah? So that we are maybe not every time doing a ping pong somehow, because then our time will run out fastly, okay? So I will take 2 speakers at least now, and then you can answer the questions, okay?
Oh, of course.
Ich muss das jetzt auf Russisch machen, das fällt mir einfacher.
Und kannst du es dann auf Deutsch
Ich übersetze es gleich, ja. Okay. Вот, я хотела бы присоединиться к товарищу Алексу насчет критики данной презентации, но это не все. Я, в принципе, с большинством, что было сказано, не согласна. Это как и насчет характеризования России, войны, характеризования Донбасса и тоже, ну, и партии коммунистические в России, которые находятся. С этим я совсем не согласна. Времени нету это сейчас все разъяснить. Да, вот. Насчет текста, которые для подготовки были нам даны, и насчет вопроса, является ли Россия империалистической, вы применяете вот эти 5 характеристики, которые были даны Лениным, и только применяете это на Россию, на внутренний маркет России. И мне кажется, это неправильное применение того, чего говорил Ленин. Это не в этом смысл. Даже была такая цитата, которая, в принципе, говорила о том, что это на первой стороне, где именно говорится, что сейчас прочитаю. Imperialism is a capitalism at a stage of development at which the dominance of monopolies at finance capital is established, in which the export of capital has acquired pronounced importance, in which the division of the world among the international trust has begun. Also division of the world, это тоже важный момент. In which the division of all territories of the globe among the biggest capitalist powers has been completed. Я не вижу, где вот эти вот монополии, которые вы тут говорите, что они, которые внутри маркете находятся, как они доказывают, что Россия является империалистической страной. А также мне очень интересно, у меня есть 2 вопроса, которые не касаются к данной презентации, а просто к вам как организации. Мне интересно, как вы пришли к такой констелляции. Мне очень интересно, что, с одной стороны, у вас и в Америке, видимо, есть тоже очаги вашей организации, а также в постсоветском пространстве. Мне это очень интересно, как это у вас получилось. И еще вопрос, я вот не совсем в курсе, но было сказано, я слышала, что вы поддерживали протесты либеральные в Беларуси, и каким образом вы пришли к тому выводу, что надо эти протесты поддерживать, если это правильно вообще. Okay, jetzt die Übersetzung. Ich habe gesagt, dass ich nicht einverstanden bin mit den meisten Teilen aus der Präsentation, vor allem auch Charakterisierung Russlands, des Donbasses und des Krieges, sowie auch die Charakterisierung der Parteien, die kommunistischen Parteien, die sich in Russland befinden. Dann habe ich noch gesagt, dass bei dem Text, den wir zur Vorbereitung hatten, die 5 Kriterien ja von Lenin angewendet wurden. Aber im Text wird eigentlich gezeigt, dass diese ganzen Monopole, die hier als Beispiel genommen werden, den russischen Markt aufteilen, aber nicht die Welt. Also die Monopole, also deswegen fand ich das nicht ausreichend als Beweis. Und als Frage habe ich gestellt, wie es zu dieser Konstellation der Organisation kommt. Es auf der einen Seite Teile in den USA sind und der andere Teil aber im postsowjetischen Raum. Also ich interessiere mich wirklich dafür, wie das zustande kommt. Und weil ich gehört habe, dass diese Organisation auch die Proteste, die liberalen Proteste in Weißrussland unterstützt hatte, frage ich mich auch, wie man zu dieser Bewertung kommt.
No, maybe you can provide the translation. Okay, so I will take one speaker more, and then Vasily, you can give an answer.
All right, great.
Yeah, I will also start with a question. It's about the nature of the monopolies in Russia, because you stated in one text that 70% of the monopolies are domestic. And I wanted to ask about the influence of foreign capital in Russia. If you can say something about which percentage of the capital is in foreign hands and how much is the influence, because in our organization, there's a huge discussion about this point. And then I have a comment or maybe also a critic on one of your texts where you talk about the motivation of the Russian bourgeoisie to go to do the military, to go to Syria. And you mention mainly the cheap oil as a reason. And I think it would be a mistake to look only at such short-term economic motivations, because I think a huge part of the motivation was to become a more important player on the in the global concurrence, also to gain more influence abroad from the regional sphere of influence. And maybe a part was also, as I read, a huge debt of Syria concerning the sale of weapons, but I think that's not the most important point. So maybe you could elaborate on the motivation of the Russian bourgeoisie to go to Syria. And then as a next point, I found very interesting your talk about the denazification in Ukraine. You compared it to what happened in Germany. And I think you made a very good point about in Western Germany, denazification by capitalist countries didn't work. I think as a German communist, we know that. And you showed that the Soviet Union managed to do the net denazification in the GDR. And so I think it would be interesting to talk about that concerning Ukraine. And now the last point, sorry, it's a bit long. I think it would be dangerous to say that the RCWP is the same as the CPRF, because I think the CPRF has done a lot of things that are wrong and has said a lot of things that are wrong. For example, a high representative of them participated in the meeting of the Fascist Alternative for Germany. And as you know, they are also saying that Belarus and Ukraine belong to Russia due to the history and should we unite now in capitalism. And I think these are only two examples where I say that's very, very dangerous for communists to say. But with the
RCWP.
Yeah, thank you. I think I don't agree with a lot of the content, but I think some things they say are interesting and it's worth discussing with them. So I would treat these two parties differently. And I think, yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, now, Vasily.
All right. So I hope there will be no problem in connecting the first question of the first speaker and the first question of the second speaker, as they're tightly connected in essence. So comrades claim that our characteristic of the Russian Federation as an imperialist state is wrong. Well, this topic, actually we can discuss it for literally hours, and a lot of materials were written. Our materials, well, you could see them. They were handed as well. There are materials not by our organization only, but by, for example, the Communist Party of Sweden. Its leader, Andreas Sørensen. I don't know if he's in the room right now, but his material on the imperialism, it's literally called Russia and Imperialism. It researches the same topic and goes to the same conclusion. Yes, there are monopolies in Russia. They actively engage not just in the inner market, but in the outer as well. They expand in the former Soviet countries, in some countries of Africa. in Syria. They try to engage in the Middle Asia as well, going in Latin America too. There are numerous proofs. You can find them in use. You can find them in our materials as well. And the motivation of the bourgeoisie, the cheap oil is not actually the only one. If we're speaking about the interests of the capital in Ukraine, for example, of the Russian capital, what they get not just oil and gas resources that are hidden in the Ukrainian soil. They also get a lot of food markets. They get trade. They get markets of labor, markets for resources, markets for selling their production. And in that case, like, those things are quite common. You can search for them in Google, in Yandex, in other search browsing sites. Those things come in contradiction with what Russian officials say when they say about denazification, about demilitarizing Ukraine. And while just several days ago, they actually had prisoners of war exchange with Ukraine, and they gave back to Ukraine those people, like the leaders of the neo-Nazi Azov battalion, which they claimed gonna be executed in Russia for being neo-Nazis. There were a lot of claims about this thing. Officials and propagandists shouted with hatred, like that they will not give them back to Ukraine, they will judge them, they will execute them, they will send them to prison, and then they basically send them back. So the question of imperialism, again, like we had very few space to show like the whole essence of the Russian imperialism in our presentation, as it would take a lot more time. But we showed several examples. We give you the latest statistics. At the end, we gave you articles in paper. And well, if you disagree, you can always write your own material criticizing this or that thing. We would be more than glad to see that and to defend our positions. Again, thank you for this question about imperialism. And then I'd like to answer the question about our organization. So yes, like during our work, there were people from foreign countries, and not just Russians living in other countries, but just foreign people. They wrote to us, they said, oh, you have a good agitation and propaganda posters, videos, articles. What can I do to help you? And we had no problem in communicating with them. You know, we're not this kind of bureaucrats who say like, you're not an organization, you're not a party, we will not talk to you. We said, okay, if you want to work with us, that's better. We can give you this or that task. You can translate things. You can do them by yourself. You can engage and work with our comrades in Russia, in former Soviet republics. And well, I'm speaking right now as the secretary of the international section of Politsturm. We're collecting news and materials from different parts of the world. Yes, we have people in the United States, we have people in Europe, and Comrade Alexander is one of them. That's a great deal, a big opportunity to attend in this meeting offline, because even RCWP, you know, they consider themselves a party, and they did not have people or time or money to send an offline delegate, and we did. That's also a great point of attention. If we speak about liberal protests in Belarus, I don't know where did you get that information. Actually, on the contrary, we opposed both liberal protests and the currently existing regime in Belarus. Actually, we denounced our opponents in Russia. several opportunist organizations who called to support liberal protests because they would give different freedoms. They will allow communists to act in a more open way. And that's why they called for workers of Belarus, for Russian communists to succumb to the Belarusian liberals and simply to do things in their favor. No, that's not right. We opposed this point of view. We produced several materials, articles, and videos. You can actually see a video on our YouTube channel. It's named on Belarusian protests. We explain our position here clearly.
Okay, can you just the last point about RCWP and CPRF, the difference, if you want to comment on that, or what the comments?
Yes, I can answer this question as well. So if we take CPRF, CPRF is, as I mentioned before, is a long-term part of the Russian political system. They are tightly connected. RCWP for decades showed itself as an alternative to the CPRF. However, if you take a closer look, both organizations have a strong nationalist bias. Both organizations lack of communist work. Both organizations claim themselves to be the only good representative of the communist movement in Russia. And well, both of these organizations support the current conflict. They support the Russian government. So, of course, they are not exactly the same, and we did not say that thing. However, what they're doing is objectively supporting the Russian capital. And this is the thing where they are allied. Well, maybe CPRF says they support them because denazification, demilitarization. RCWP says, no, actually Russia is imperialist, but look at the United States, look at what they did to Yugoslavia, Syria, and Libya. So we're for Russian government because it's progressive. And this is the point where they align.
Okay, thank you. So the next speakers, we have now two speakers from here, then Alex and me, and then two more speakers. And then I will close the speakers list. So you will have to wait a little bit. But in between, Vasily, you will be able to answer now. So Gregor.
Comrades, I'll make it fast. I'm sorry, I've joined the speech too late. So probably you already answered this question. There's one elephant in the room for me. We all know there's always the danger of regime change in Russia or Belarus. How, as communists, do we draw the line so we don't become tools for regime change of NATO? How do you answer this question? That's it.
Okay, next speaker, and then.
I think the most things are already said. So, but there are still two questions I wanted to ask regarding, you spoke several times about the Trotskyites in Russia, for example, regarding the RCWP and other organizations. And I wanted to ask, who are these Trotskyites exactly? So which organizations or which movements are there? Then the other question would be, there are several organizations within Russia who, in my opinion, share the same or pretty similar aims like you. For example, the Union of Marxists, or I think it's also boundary of the Marxist clubs, Lenin Crew. I wanted to ask, what are your relations with your organizations, and what's your position on them? Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can answer, right?
Yes.
Taking the first question about the danger of regime change. Well, it's well known that the capital in every country is not a monolith. There are different groups in the ruling class, and like one of them gets the power and the other one wants to take it from the first one. The communists can oppose the regime change, if we speak about changing one capitalist group to another, only if they have a strong, united communist party. If they're tightly connected with the workers' movement, if they can use the crisis moment to actually change the life of the workers for better, not to change the exploiters, like the masks. And this thing, it's only possible with the Communist Party. So our task, as was mentioned in presentation by Comrade Alexander, is firstly to organize such an organization that could act in a better for communists way. Danger of regime change, well, no one is safe from that. Like even now in Russia, when the mobilization began, we see a strong decline. A lot of people get in politics really fast. They start to think, to look around, to think why did they end in getting mobilized, all those things. And there are several groups of capitalists that disagree with that as well. Before the conflict, they supported Navalny, they supported liberals. Now they are a bit suppressed, but they still exist. And if the representatives of the ruling capitalist group, they start to think something is wrong and something should be changed, they can actually do it. But still, liberating the workers is the cause of the workers themselves. No one can liberate them. Also, speaking about the second question, well, I'm afraid I did not understand, but was the question about Trotskyists in Russia in general, or Trotskyists connected to Roth Front? Well, if we speak about Trotskyists in general, there are several organizations. One of them is Marxist Tendency. It's openly aligned with IMT, International Marxist Tendency. There is a Socialist Alternative, which is also connected to one of those Trotskyist internationals. There is a Revolutionary Workers' Party, another Trotskyist group. And there was funding for Union of Marxists, which was mentioned as well, from German Rosa Luxemburg Fund. And this group, Union of Marxists, it was created several years ago by people including Trotskyists, at least former Trotskyists from the so-called workers' platform. Maybe the comrade who asked this question, I think he knows Andrei Rudoy. Rudoy is one of the media faces of the Union of Marxists. And what this organization does is radically opposed to the tasks of our organization. We struggle for creating a communist organization based on democratic centralism, and they struggle for creating basically a Russian variant of Die Linke or Labor Party, to create a federation of different groups, currents, platforms, these kind of things. We opposed this work in numerous materials. You can find materials about organizational structure of Union of Marxists on our Russian site. And Lenin Crew is another deviation. Well, I don't want to say a lot about them because their group, even several times smaller than Politsturm, they were firstly a split from RCWP, one of their regional organizations. And then they support the so-called scientific centralism. They say that democratic centralism is bad because it allowed bad people to get in the ruling party. And what they need is to get several big brains who will decide if this or that guy is worth of becoming a communist. Of course, that looks ridiculous, and that's it.
Okay, so then Alex.
Okay. I want to make 2 points. The first point is about your theory, your text about the question if Russia is imperialist, and the second point is in general the way your argumentation is made. Okay, the first thing about the 5 criteria of Lenin, I think you make a big mistake because in your text, is Russia imperialist? You take the 5 criteria of Lenin like a checklist for a national economy. You have the 5 points, and you write that all these points you have in Russia, and your conclusion is Russia is imperialist. And I think you cannot use the theory like a checklist for national economies, because you have to see the 5 criteria of Lenin in the international international context. And I want to show this mistake in one example. In one example, you have the headline of capital outflow, and the chapter of capital outflow is starting with the sentence, "The export of capital is an integral property of the imperialist state," etc. And it's not clear what you are writing about, because the headline is capital outflow, and what you want to show is the export of capital. And it's a big difference between capital outflow and export of capital, because capital outflow, and this is really happening in Russia a lot, is the way capitalists in Russia try to get out their money out of the country, because the accumulation in Russia is is not working well. It's a sign of the weakness of the Russian capitalists. They're not of the weakness. Yeah, they have gained this money in the counter-revolution, and now they try to get the money out of the country. They're not able to control other countries or companies with this capital export, like U.S. financial capital and U.S. Export of capital. Yeah. US investors, they can control whole countries and whole big companies with their investments. Russian capitalists are not able to do this. The second point is the way your argumentation is working. It's very bad, I think, because what you do, you want to show that reactionary tendencies in Russia are growing. Yeah, they're getting bigger. And your proof for this thesis is some photos about tanks in Russia with a number of 88 and soldiers with a Totenkopf, I don't know, with this thing on with scalp from the SS on the where there was no source of these photos. In wars you have a lot of fake propaganda. Yeah, photos can be faked. You cannot say where these photos are from. And this is not a good proof. If you want to prove reactionary tendencies in Russia, you have to show it in a different way. Furthermore, you have shown one soldier who is saying that the Slavic nation has to be protected, and that the children and families have to be protected. Is this the sign of growing reactionary tendencies? I think no. So in the end, I want to say that in order to prove your theses, you take photos, you take some facts that fit into your argumentation. And I want to say that this is the same way the NATO propaganda is trying to argue the reactionary tendencies in Russia and to make a defamation to the Russian politics and military operation. This is very dangerous because Russia is in danger. Russia is the aim of the national sovereignty of Russia is endangered by the NATO politics. Yeah, the NATO is trying to make a regime change in Russia to create the same situation like in the 90s in Russia. And I have a lot of friends in Russia who say that this situation in the 90s was a kind of colony, yeah, that the life standard of the working class was very bad. People were suffering hunger, etc. And the NATO imperialists, they say it openly. Our foreign ministry is saying that Russia should be degraded, should be ruined, yeah. And so I think Russia as a country, and of course the Russian people and Russian working class, they are in danger. And if you go into this propaganda against Russia and say these things and argue the same way our propaganda is arguing, is a very dangerous way. And I would say that I completely support the position of RCWP and CPRF that the national sovereignty of Russia must be protected, and the Russian working class should not now aim to make to destroy the state, or I don't know how to say it in English.
Is that all from you?
Yeah. It was a longer one now. Maybe I continue with mine, and then Vasily, your the next one.
Yeah, of course.
Then we have two speakers in the end. So just a short comment, because I do not agree with you concerning the article of Politsturm that you mentioned and the capital outflow. They clearly state different ways of how this outflow functions, and they mentioned examples. It's not a full-scale analysis made in this article, and I wouldn't argue again for this, but what they clearly show that there are different ways how capital export works for Russia, and it's obviously the truth. It's obviously what's happening. So you cannot say that this is a special difference in capital outflow, even though these types of exporting the capital to Cyprus, for example, and reinvesting it in Russia is happening, but these are certain forms. But this is not the idea that this is not a capital export in the end. So I don't agree with this conclusion that you made. The other ones, I think Vasily can answer better than me. But I want to ask you one thing. I thought your critique concerning Alexander Bartov and Rote Front for me is still not clear. What I mean is that you criticize on the one hand that they use world system analysis from Wallerstein. This is a certain analysis of the situation of the world. It grew out of dependency theories, yeah. So it's I think from the 90s, 80s, 90s. And I clearly see that Oleg Komolov uses these ideas. So for example, center-periphery difference is made pretty strong in Wallerstein's theory. And I see that they start to use it somehow, but I cannot see from this directly the practical consequence that you assume they do, because you said, okay, they are organizing only in a broad left type. I know that Rote Front is a broader organization, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about it. But I wouldn't say that the comrades like Alexander Bartov think that this is the Communist Party, or this is this is enough for having a Communist Party, because he was also organized in RCWP before, so in a type of Communist Party, even though maybe there it lacks obviously the ability to be a Communist Party, an avant-garde really. But yeah, maybe you can elaborate more how you connect this critique of their understanding of imperialism and their practice on the ground, and why do you see there a connection somehow? And maybe in this sense, you can also talk, what do you think about, especially since they support the joint statement as well, that Kukue and TKP made concerning this war. There was this joint statement that you support, and people like Alexander Bartov obviously also support. Yeah, maybe you can say a little bit more about the former youth organization, which of RCWP, RKSMB, which is, in my understanding, pretty close to Alexander Bartov and the people from Rote Front. Yeah.
So you want me to tell you more about Bartov and Rote Front, right?
Yeah, if possible. So where is the connection of the critique of their content and the critique of their practice?
All right. So starting with the points of the first comrade. Well, again, our material, yes, it was supposed to cover all the Russian imperialism. We're not writing a book here. It's an article, but still, as mentioned by the second speaker, there are points that are good. And actually, the thing that there is no big book on the Russian imperialism that would denounce the Russian imperialism, there is no such book, is one of the things where the international communist movement shows a big problem. We mentioned in our presentation that lack of unified theory is one of the fundamental problems of the international communist movement. And the question of Russia, the question of China, the question of European Union, the question of American imperialism is where this problem shows itself very clearly. Secondly, as mentioned in presentation as well in Alexander's speech, we were not going to show all the photos, all the videos of Russian neo-Nazis in presentation. It would fit a lot of space. It would require a lot of time. We were showing just several examples. Firstly, there is literally a big official and the state television channel saying that communists are bad, communists are gonna prepare the revolution, they're gonna act just as liberals. And the second one is when just a simple average man was taken by Russia Today, by another Russian official media, and with basically racist views. Like, it's not about children. Take a look. It's only if they're white, only if they're born in Slavic lands. Like the fact that he is pointing on the color of the skin, on the race, is already something. And it's not a secret that there are actually a lot of neo-Nazis in the Russian forces. Take, for example, the Recon group Rusich. Take, for example, Milchakov. Take, for example, Evgeny Topaz Raskazov. This guy is infamously known for sending videos in Telegram where he and his band committed war crimes. They killed Ukrainian prisoner of war. And well, it's not fake propaganda. It's actually what neo-Nazis show themselves, because they are proud now. They're on the rise now. They fight in the Russian armed forces or in the Wagner Corporation, and they're proud of themselves. They say, hey, look, we're doing those edgy things. We're cool. Government is supporting us. We're decommunizing Ukraine. Yes, they're big fans of that. And they basically do it. It's not a secret. Of course, so again, we could not show all the videos, all the materials in one presentation. But if you want, we can always send you a list of them, like, for example, on email. That's no problem. And finally, the logic, NATO is bad, Russia is good, otherwise it's going to be like in the 90s. But, well, that's kind of hypocritical for me as a Russian communist, because you live in Germany, like you say, they're going to be like in the 90s. But I can say you that Russia is already becoming like in the 90s. The life standards are dropping greatly. Prices are growing. yeah, I can hardly buy some things that I could afford before February 2022, even before 2020, because there was a crisis. It's not a process where like there is a evil side, there is a good side. Both sides are evil and both are interested in suppressing workers, and that is what they do really well. And it's actually nonsense for Russian communists, again, to see people abroad saying, like, chill out, you just need to support the government. They're so progressive. Otherwise, there's going to be like Syria and Libya. But this exact government is already doing what was done in Syria or Libya. They're doing it in Ukraine, and in Russia, they're doing what was in the 90s. Going to the second question, the critique of Rotfront, the large-scale material, we have this thing in plans, but it's not written yet. And the problem is that well, currently we have some more important problems, like we have mobilization, and actually the leadership of our organization is in danger. We have to find funds to relocate them. We have to find a way to keep our work. And well, if you want to see some certain examples, we can send you by email. You can write in our social networks. We will provide them. About Batov and Rotfront, Batov was well known for years for his, let me translate from Russian, for his great self-esteem, I would say. For example, it was known like for a long period of time, we wanted to connect with the Communist Party of Greece, and they were simply ignoring us. It took years and sending them a delegate offline to see that, like, what's the situation, what's the problem. And recently turned out the whole problem was because back in 2017, Batov was on one of the meetings with the leadership of the Communist Party of Greece. And he said, nah, those freaks are just an ideological resource. You don't need to communicate with them. And that was awful. But it's not just one problem. The problem is that this same Batov who quit the RCWP after the February things, he was actually responsible for doing all those bad things we mentioned, like lack of theoretical work, lack of practice, lining with this or that bad guy, different things, like enormous spread of broad left channels, social media. These are the consequences of the work of RCWP, and Batov, as one of the leaders of the RCWP, was responsible for them.
Next speaker.
Hi, I'm Nastya from KO, and I unfortunately missed the preparing time and the first part of your presentation. And I think there are many things to say now, but I actually only have a question. Because I want to learn more about the composition of the Russian working class and their organizations. And my question is regarding the CPIF-RF. I think I'm according in general to your critics, but we have to consider that it's an important organization in Russia, which we can see in their representation in the parliament, for example. And I'm wondering what the class basis of this party is. So who are their followers? Do they reach distinct stratums of the working class or the whole working class? And for which reasons are they elected? Is it for their social politics or ideas that they some kind of have? Or is it maybe for some kind of nostalgic reasons? Or how can you explain the success of the CPIF? I hope you didn't answer this question in the first part of your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Wait, Vasily, there will be the last question from the speaker, next speaker, and then you can answer.
Great. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. And before handing out the text on imperialism, I read this text in preparation for the conference, the Congress here. And I think it's good if we talk about actual contents and about data. I don't think the texts prove what you say it proves, but that's a discussion about content. However, what you did in your presentation, I think it has very little content, and it was very much about attaching labels, about calling people or organizations social chauvinists, opportunists, Trotskyists, reformists, revisionists. These are the kinds of labels you're operating with, and you're just defaming other organizations without actually giving the content of why you think these labels apply. In this Congress, we tried to have serious discussion about the question of imperialism and the war in Ukraine. And you know, or if you don't know, you're badly prepared for this Congress, that this is the content of our Congress, and that there's different positions in the organization KO and on this Congress on this topic. However, by attaching labels, you are basically saying people who have this position, they're social chauvinists, they're not communists, and you're doing this without content. So what you're basically doing is, for a part of this Congress, you're saying they have basically positions that we don't even need to argue with. We just need to attach labels to it and call it names. In preparation for this Congress, I also watched an interview of yours that you, Vasily, gave on the YouTube channel, The Finnish Bolshevik, 2 years ago, where you made the same shallow, surface-level criticisms of the Russian Communist Workers' Party. And then you go on to talk about a Trotskyist group in Russia with accusations of rape by some of their members. And then you say, well, this is just the usual way Trotskyists operate, right? If this is the kind of criticism you have to offer, then I have no further questions.
Now, last round of answers from Vasily.
All right. So, well, actually, both questions, like in this or that part, they were mentioned previously, but okay. Firstly, about CPRF, like, is CPRF popular? I would not say so. Like, they have quite a few members. They have a good part of deputies in the Russian State Duma. However, if we take a look at what CPRF was back in early 2000, like in the early 21st century, they had a much greater population. They had stronger deputy group. Actually, back in 1995, the CPRF controlled almost half of the State Duma. That was enormous period, and for all those decades, they were slowly becoming fewer and fewer. If we take the parliament, the ruling party accumulated the majority of the seats. Now they can pass all the laws without even taking the opposition into account. The communists, like the main reason the CPRF exists is that the government needs someone to represent the left side. There were several attempts by the ruling class to create spoiler parties to make a share from a CPRF. They created the so-called Communists of Russia, which they look literally the same. They have very similar symbols, and there is no big difference between them. They created a broad left party called Just Russia, just from justice. They tried to create several patriotic left spoiler parties, but they failed. CPRF exists, and that's all. However, the quality of the work they do, it's very low. I myself know personally people who said, we just want to make a career in organization, in the state apparatus, but a United Russia party, which is the ruling one, it's just too cringy, as they say, for us. So we decided to join the CPRF. I know people who are serving in Russian police, who serve in Russian structures related to state security, who are members of that organization. And it's quite easy for the government to fill the organization with agents. There was just recently a story of a man who was recruited while being in CPRF, Young Communists League, who was recruited by FSB to provide them with intelligence.
The Secret Service, you mean, FSB?
Yeah, exactly. If we take the second question, like again about labels, without context, this was, I guess, the first question that was asked by one of the moderators. And well, again, we could take all the organizations, we could take all the necessary information, but it would not take an hour, and it would not even take 2 hours. I'm afraid it would take the whole day to look through all these organizations, to point on this or that problem, to collect them all. About labeling, well, materials about Russian communist organizations, they were provided before the meeting, and we have certain topics, we have certain positions, we point on this or that place in their statement, which is, in our opinion, is bad, as it denounced workers. If we speak about other organizations that were not mentioned, yes, we can prove we have them in Russian materials, but they are not translated in English with this or that thing where this or that organization showed themselves in a bad state, showed themselves as people who operate not according to Marxist theory, but according to sentiments, to this or that bourgeois theory, these kind of things. We're currently working on making a big video and making big materials about what's currently happening in the Russian communist movement. And what we gave here is just a brief overlook. So if you want to get more proofs on why is this or that organization bad, we can provide them, and we will provide them.
Just to come back, because there were, within these questions, there were a little bit more. It was the question about the class basis of CPRF, meaning the electoral, the voters of CPRF.
Yes, sorry.
Voting CPRF and so on. And the second one was, he was commenting on the interview that you did. I don't know if you want to comment on this as well.
Yeah, I can. So about the class structure of the CPRF, from what I know, the CPRF consists of firstly people who are like 50, 60 years old, because they were members of CPSU, then went bad 90s, and so they decided to join CPRF. They have very few opinion about the current processes in the party. They just belong because it's red, it has sickle and hammer, just like in good old times. Another part is the youngsters, which I mentioned before. They want to get in power, but they don't know what organization they want to choose. A united Russia looks bad. Like if they join, their friends gonna tell you, oh, you're in the ruling party, it's so bad. Like, they have a lot of corruption here. And if they join CPRF, they're kind of okay, but just kind of. I don't have an information about like in percent, in diagram about the class structure of CPRF, but even if there are workers in this organization, well, they're acting against their own interests. And about the interview, I would say that it's not about labeling this or that organization again, but what we see here, and it's actually a common accusation against us in the among the Russian so-called Marxists, is that, you know, you're just labeling someone. Well, no, it's basically not like that. We have proofs, we have examples.
Okay, so thank you, Vasily. I think we will stop here. We have 2 hours full now. of your speech and the discussion. I think it was very interesting to have this discussion with you. And I conclude here. Thanks for Alexander for your speech, and thanks for Vasily for answering the questions. And we will conclude here and see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.